Hello and welcome to a special live show for tonight's star-studded 2-game NFL DFS slate. We have some absolute superstars on this slate. Even though we lost Dak Prescott, we have Patrick Mahomes, we have Kyler Murray, we have Josh Allen, we have Ezekiel Elliott, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we have DeAndre Hopkins, we have Tyreek Hill, we have Travis Kelce. It's all here to talk about this slate and to review a bit of yesterday. I am joined by Drew Dinkmeyer and Mike Leone. Also, producer Mike, doubling as well. Drew Dinkmeyer, how's it going, buddy?
It's good. I'm ready for another slate after yesterday, so I'm happy to be here. We're on to Monday.
Yes, this is a forward-thinking show, although I do want to talk about yesterday for a second. Mike Leone, what's up, buddy?
I'm amped for tonight. This is the most excited I've been for a Bills game in a while, so I'm prepared for disappointment.
Well, let me give the people some background. Leone lives in Buffalo, is actually a real Bills fan. In other words, he goes to the parking lot, smashes natty ices against his forehead, jumps off of trucks onto tables. Is that correct, Leone?
Yeah, something like that. You know, I got to train my 3-year-old son, Micah, to do the proper table jumping technique. So he's, breaks that table right in half and doesn't hurt himself.
Yeah. I'm glad to see, we've had some arguments about Cam. I'm glad to see that now everybody's realizing that, hey, it's hard to win with the weapons that the Patriots have. And I think no matter what happens tonight, the Bills are in really good shape to win this division, Leone. I mean, am I out of bounds by saying that?
No, I think they're in great shape. Even if Allen regresses a little bit, the coaching staff has been so impressive. Each year they just seem to get better. They're running a lot of play action. They're running a lot of motion pre-snap. They're playing a lot of 4 wide receiver sets, getting Gabriel Davis on the field. So I'm really optimistic. And the defense, it really can't play any worse than it has through 5 weeks, and they're 4-1. So I feel pretty optimistic.
Okay, before we get to tonight, I want to talk about yesterday for a second. And obviously the story of yesterday was Derrick Henry, the big dog, going absolutely nuclear. And I find Derrick Henry extremely difficult to handle in DFS because when you don't have a big role in the pass game, and when you are very touchdown dependent like Derrick Henry is, your range is really wide. And of course, we're producing median projections. You can find those on the site. It's hard in a median projection to account for what Derrick Henry can do from a ceiling perspective, and also account for games where he goes 20 carries for 90 yards and he ends up with 9 points with no catches and no touchdowns. Now, yesterday's matchup was incredible. Like, this was the spot you want to use Derrick Henry, home against a really bad rush defense where you think that they're going to be playing from ahead. So I guess some regrets on not just betting on raw talent and spot for Derrick Henry enough yesterday. How'd you handle Derrick Henry yesterday, Drew? And do we learn anything? What can we take going forward about Derrick Henry?
Yeah, I think one of the challenging things, the thing that you described about Derrick Henry is essentially he's got the performance profile of a tournament play, but he's always got the ownership of a tournament fade. And it's just one of the challenging aspects of dealing with him, because when he does hit, he usually hits in a way that just completely breaks the slate. I went into Sunday anticipating being overweight Henry and being overweight Madison as a way to leverage against kind of the chalkier aspects of those passing games. I ended up with basically neutral weight on both of those because of the Curtis Samuel news being inactive, bumping up Mike Davis's projection, ended up being overweight on Davis. So it was a frustrating day for me because the way that I intended to play was not the way that I kind of ended up playing because of some late news, and that's always really frustrating. But in general, in terms of handling Derrick Henry going forward, I think you need to almost take a position on him each and every week, and because the field is pretty much going to play him. And so you need to either be in on him or be against him. And if you're in on him, you need to be thoughtful on kind of the ways you're getting different on those lineups away from him. As we saw yesterday, the lineups that won away from him were situations with that Atlanta-Minnesota game stacked in contrarian ways. Not Thielen, not Alexander Madison, but Ridley, Julio Jones, Justin Jefferson, Cousins, Ryan, guys that weren't owned. And so ended up being like, it was frustrating for me because it ended up being a lineup that I think really sharp tournament lineups won yesterday. Like, I think those were good tournament lineups to play, and I just didn't play them.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Leone, I want to get your take on Henry, but I think one of the things about yesterday for tournaments was these wide receivers kind of getting there. A.J. Brown got there late. Adam Thielen didn't help the tournament cause by getting a touchdown late Also, and then Chase Claypool he only saw 4 targets in the game. And that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to be low on Chase Claypool was, hey, they still are going to throw to Juju and Ebron and James Washington and James Conner. And I feel like it was right on the Chase Claypool fade, and he gets there with a freaking rushing touchdown. So I think it was a little bit frustrating there. And then also the cheap tight end chalk, which I think was, okay, but Burton and Irv also kind of getting there in their own way. So what do you think about yesterday, Leone?
Yeah, I mean, Burton had a rushing TD, and then he had a receiving TD after a Hilton TD got called back on an iffy penalty. So I do think the cheap tight end was okay. I thought one of the mistakes I made yesterday was trying to over leverage the cheap tight ends where, not necessarily even forcing myself to play Irv and Burton. In retrospect, it's easy to say, oh, just play that cheap tight end chalk. But I really tried to force a different build with more expensive tight ends. And these guys just aren't separating enough, and they can just really kill your lineup when they don't perform. So I think I had too many, of the expensive tight ends that didn't have that ceiling. As far as big dog goes, when there's 4 running back chalk plays, and we saw this last week as well, I think the key is you don't want to play 3 of those guys. I think you really, and I think you just start to limit your outs and how you can beat the field. And it's not that those lineups can't win. We saw 3 chalky running backs win with the right stack yesterday, but you need to be really perfect. You need to thread the needle, so to speak. So I thought Henry was fine because he wasn't more or less owned than Mike Davis and Alexander Madison. And if I was redoing my builds, I might have split Davis and Henry a little bit more, just knowing that Henry had the higher ceiling because we know he's going to do this 2 to 3 times a year and we can't really predict it. Also wish that I did a Houston stack. Wiggins had pointed out on the Wake and Rake show, and I pulled it up on the screen. And, whenever you have the quarterback and 2 clear receivers all projecting as plus values and not high ownership, it's kind of a no-brainer stack. And then you could have brought it back with Tennessee. And Big Dog is one of those running backs, as we saw, he can speed a game up. 94-yard touchdown run, that speeds the entire game up. But that game also did run pretty pure at the end with just how it broke with the A.J. Brown getting to overtime. And Big Dog goes from 30 points, which is really good, but maybe survivable, to absolutely burying you with another 13 points in overtime.
Yeah.
I just wanted to issue a quick correction, Adam, on what you said about Chase Claypool. The Steelers, they might throw to Eric Ebron. They might throw to James Washington. They're not throwing to Juju Smith-Schuster. That's just never happening again, apparently. No matter who's injured, no matter how many guys are out, Juju's just not getting thrown to. So all the other points stand.
Dink is on mega tilt with Juju Smith-Schuster and DJ Moore.
It's just an abomination. Between that and then drafting Rieger ahead of Jefferson and all these rookie drafts in Dynasty, I am just losing it. Just absolutely losing it.
Okay. The only other thing that I would add is that leveraging off the cheap tight ends was cool and all, except they were all just bad plays. That was the thing. I wanted to try to fade Burton and Irv in tournaments, but gosh, I mean, paying $5,300 for Hockenson or $5K for Ertz and all that stuff was just too much for me to handle.
Those were the guys I know Logan Thomas keeps burning us, but I would have rather played more of him and less of Hockenson and less of Ertz. Yeah. Hockenson was the leverage off Galladay.
Hooper.
I don't know why I didn't play more Hooper.
Hooper was the guy, but I think what Adam's saying is essentially that Ertz Hawk tier. If those guys are 4,400, it's a different situation. You can have the pass to the upside, but at 5K, you're really asking a lot. And I got stuck in making that same mistake as well, and just frustrating because the pricing just kind of put you in this tough spot where there weren't enough guys kind of in the 4s to help things out.
Yeah. Okay. We've talked enough about yesterday. I have been home by myself for 2 days only eating ice cream. So that means I am extremely prepared for tonight's 2-game slate. I mean, this is a absolutely star-studded slate, as I said, and we're going to mainly talk about the 2-game slate here. By the way, if you guys are new, please hit subscribe to the channel. If you guys do that, we can keep producing some of these extra shows, these free shows on YouTube. Also, if you're new and interested in trying Establish the Run for the first time, there are a couple promo codes in the description below for you. We do have projections up for tonight's 2-game slate. We do have a showdown breakdown up for tonight's big showdown in the later game. I expect a ton of action, as there always is on these kind of 2-game island slates. With that said, let's get to it. And man, the running back position, I think, is where we need to start. Normally we start with quarterback, but running back is so unique here because especially on DraftKings, and we'll talk about FanDuel in a second, especially on DraftKings, CEH and Zeke are projecting, and rightfully so, wildly ahead of everybody else. And a lot of people's lineups are going to come preloaded with CEH and Zeke. So I am wondering, Drew, how to handle this in tournaments, because being overweight the field on CEH and Zeke means quite literally lock buttoning CEH and Zeke.
Yeah, and I think part of the tricky thing is, at least on FanDuel, there's enough pricing variance where you feel like you can make teams that are different if you do that, and you have kind of some opportunity cost and choices. On DraftKings, with the way the pricing is, like, if you don't play these guys, you're just leaving thousands of dollars on the table essentially at the running back position. So it's a really tricky spot. I think it's trickier on DraftKings than it is on FanDuel. But if you are to fade these guys and kind of go in the direction, who is the alternative? Like, what's the scenario that it works, right? The scenario that it works is these guys don't find the end zone, because the moment they find the end zone, the moment either one of them finds the end zone, they're likely getting into the optimal lineup on DraftKings, just because they're likely going to separate themselves from the other running backs. It's going to be tough for the other running backs to score multiple times, just given the way that we've seen them utilized so far this year. And so you're fading them getting into the end zone. So you want to think through, okay, like with Edwards-Helaire, there's a lot of other ways that the Chiefs score, right? There's Kelsey, there's Hardman, Tyreek Hill. There's lots of different ways that they can score. So you can see that a little bit more. With Zeke, it's tougher. Is Andy Dalton going to go out there and throw 4 or 5 touchdown passes, or is the offense going to fold as a whole? And then once you figure out the scenarios of, okay, they don't score, then how do these next tier of guys beat them, and who beats them? And I think the biggest question mark would come down to, like, what do you think of the Arizona rushing attack? Do we think Kenyon Drake is finally going to get supplanted by Chase Edmonds? Kenyon Drake's been one of the least efficient and least productive running backs in football to this point. And Chase Edmonds, every time he's gotten an opportunity, has shown out. And that's really the only guy that seems like he has the type of, the only situation that has the type of volume upside to kind of get there. How are you guys handling that Arizona running back situation? Because now they're priced somewhat similarly because of the way that they've been performing.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation where Edmonds is getting more of the high value touches, but Drake's getting more work overall. And as a result, you see on both DraftKings and FanDuel, we have the pair projected really similarly. Drake separates a little bit more on FanDuel because he, half PPR, and that's where Edmonds kind of catches him. So I feel like if I were to take a shot on one of those two, I would take a shot on Edmonds seeing an increased workload beyond what he's already seen, because he's getting those high value touches. So if you go from those high value touches and then you mix in some more traditional rushing work, or he takes over the workload, that's a route to a really big ceiling. Whereas I think Drake's route to hitting is just more efficiency. And I don't know how much better, unless he breaks a couple long runs, which is possible, but I don't think he's totally going to kill you. Whereas I think Edmonds, if there's a role change, he could do really well. And if there's not a role change, you can still suck out because he's going to catch passes. And at least early on, he's found the end zone a lot more than Kenyon Drake. I also think Zach Moss is interesting here at 4K on DraftKings. I think he's more playable on FanDuel at 5,300, where it's weird to say, but the pricing's tighter, in my opinion, on FanDuel, or at least the values are scrunched together more similarly. So there's more routes to, maybe fading a Zeke, for example, at 9,500. It's a lot harder to do on DraftKings. And Zach Moss basically split carries with Devin Singletary the first 2 weeks of the season. He's the guy who's going to get the goal line touches, and he can contribute in the passing game, even though Singletary is going to see more targets than him. So coming back from injury, I could see almost no ownership on him. Someone I really want to play. I think the leverage is smart, but as I build single entry 3 max teams, you are asking for a lot for those builds to get there overall, especially on DraftKings.
Yeah. The Clyde Edwards-Helaire fade is interesting because we've seen him fail repeatedly this season, not just simply by failing because he doesn't get the touchdowns. And as Dink said, if he doesn't score touchdowns, they have so many other options too. Well, and Chase Bailey's making a comment here about it. Yeah, I mean, they're doing other things at the goal line other than giving the ball to 5'8" CEH, who got, I believe, 5 carries inside the 5-yard line in week 1, and since then has had a couple and failed to convert those Also, the problem, Dink, is if you don't play Edwards-Helaire, you're going to end up with a lot of lineups that don't fill salary. So one of the questions we always get from people is how much should I leave on the table? And my answer is on full slates, at least for cash, I'm typically not leaving more than 200 or 300 on the table. In 2-game slates like this, I'm certainly willing to leave more, and I'm definitely willing to leave more in tournaments. So how much money are you willing to leave on the table on a slate like this?
I'm willing to leave thousands on the table in a slate like this. I mean, one of the things you have to recognize also is if you're playing these really, really big tournaments where the prize pool is really concentrated up at the top, every lineup that you're duplicating is a loss in expected value. And I've kind of walked through the idea of this before. People think that when a bunch of people like copy each other's lineups, they're all like cheating and working together. It's actually way better for you when they're doing that. Because if you think of it in the context of if you were playing in a 10-man contest and all the dollars were going up to first and second place, let's say, if you played against 9 different lineups, and they were all like equally valued around that same point, you'd have like a 10% chance of winning the prize pool. But if you were playing against 9 lineups that were exactly the same, now your lineup just needs to beat one lineup. It doesn't need to beat 8 other lineups. And as a result, now you have 50% expected value in terms of that prize pool, because if you beat that lineup, you win. And so duplicated lineups on small slates are something that immediately suck EV out of a contest. So I'm happy to leave thousands of dollars on this slate. And I did want to touch on that comment about them doing different stuff at the goal line. That was the thing that stood out most to me about the last Chiefs game. When you see them running option with Patrick Mahomes at the goal line, and they did that multiple times, that was a clear sign to me that they lack confidence in traditional running situations at the goal line with CEH. And so I think he would certainly be, from a production standpoint, an easier fade than Ezekiel Elliott. But I think on FanDuel, because of the pricing situation, you could make the case that Zeke might be a little bit of an easier fade simply because the extra $2,000 will actually allow you to access some of the high-end wide receivers instead of attacking that mid-range, which we like very much from a value perspective, but again, is a way to be different and be unique.
Yeah. Eagle here's got the comment, CH has one power run inside the 10 since week 1. I will say, I mean, we people were telling me our CEH projections were too light for weeks after week 1. And I was explaining to them, and I was explaining this touchdown issue. It's not something new. So, but like now I almost feel the other way where people are like, oh, you can't use CEH because he doesn't have the touchdown equity. It's going to hit at some point, maybe not because Le'Veon Bell is going to be in this situation moving forward after tonight's game, but I wouldn't overthink it. I think he has 2 TD plus upside in this offense with this team total. So, I thought maybe we went too far with it the previous few weeks. The market did, and just assuming he would get these touchdowns when we know Kansas City is going to do stuff like this by the goal line. And now we've seen them do that, and now we're acting like CH can't score. So, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to jam CEH. This is the last chance to get workhorse CEH. Yeah. So I'm in.
I was going to say this is the last chance to get unstuck. Like I might need literally. I need to win the Millie Maker tonight to get unstuck with CH to get unstuck on him. Okay, let's go to quarterback. And I think people are going to want to play all 4, and that's the thing. You don't normally see this on these 2-game slates. Normally on the 2-game slates, there's like 1 or 2 guys that are like clearly better than the rest. I mean, people want to play all 4. They don't want to play Dalton as much, obviously. However, Dalton gives you big savings, which aren't as needed on DraftKings, but we'll get to Kelsey in a second. And so if you want to play Kelsey, Dalton's going to pop a lot. The other 3 guys, though, separate with rushing. We've talked about this all year, where it's hard for guys like Andy Dalton, who don't give you any rushing equity, to compete with Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Kyler Murray. However, projections, as Leone has up on the screen right now, have Dalton in range to the point where he's actually pretty clearly the best value on DraftKings and still the best value on FanDuel. So let's talk about the Andy Dalton projection here. Leone, how are we getting here? How are we getting in comparable range with Dalton to these guys who have so much more rushing ability, and then Patrick Mahomes, who obviously has so much more of a touchdown and yardage ceiling?
Yeah, the offense is just so favorable. We've heard them talk all offseason and even this last week about not changing things for a team that runs a lot of plays. They're not crazy pass aggressive, actually. They're a little bit pass aggressive, but with Zeke, they're still giving him his share, but they run so many plays and they're so talented. I mean, you've got CeeDee Lamb, one of the better wide receiver prospects we've had in a long time, playing out of the slot. You've got Michael Gallup, who's a very underrated receiver overall, just hasn't gotten a ton of volume yet this year. And then Amari Cooper, one of the best receivers in the league. And look, Dalton Schultz all of a sudden can play, and Zeke's catching balls out of the backfield. So the fact that they run so many plays, they have a really high team total, and Arizona is a pretty quick team too. So there could be a lot of plays run in this game, and Dalton gets there. So I don't think, as far as pure passing, we don't have a huge downgrade from Dak in terms of Dalton's fantasy points in the passing game. The efficiency does come down a little bit. Obviously, by the goal line, you don't have that same rushing TD upside that you had with Dak, which is good for Zeke, because Dak, I think he had one game where he had 3 rushing touchdowns. People were told him to stack. So you don't have that, but that's how he gets there. I mean, he's so much cheaper. We've got, nearly a 4.5 point gap between him and the other guys. But when you're $2,500 cheaper, about $2,000 cheaper, it makes a pretty big difference. And we've got so many studs that you can fit in at the skill player positions.
Yeah. I feel like if this was a full slate, Dink would be saying, now hang on a minute, we can't play these one-dimensional quarterbacks when we have access to the two-dimensional guys. On this tighter slate, are you more intrigued by Dalton? Can we actually win the tournament with Dalton? I think the answer is yes, but it's going to take some unique things, I think.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this is totally right in the terms of talking about in a full slate versus a smaller slate. In a smaller slate, you'd think the issue would be kind of exaggerated. I think one of the interesting things is the pricing on DraftKings is so soft that you could make a case that Dalton's kind of value and floor is somewhat unnecessary, because you can pretty much still play almost whoever you want with Mahomes, with Allen, with Kyler Murray. And then on FanDuel, the rushing capabilities of Murray and Allen are more impactful than they are on DraftKings because of the scoring system, where Dalton might be just as likely to hit the 300-yard bonus as some of these guys, but he's definitely not nearly as likely to add in anything on the rushing end of the spectrum. So I think it's an interesting one. I think because of those reasons, though, I don't think people are going to play Dalton. I just think like these smaller slates, especially on Mondays, they tend to be more casual oriented in terms of the players that you compete against in fields and in tournaments. And when you think about this slate and you think about Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, those dudes are fun to roster. Mm-hmm. They are fun, exciting options to roster. You look through the game logs, you'll see 30-point performances. And then there's Andy Dalton. And what do people remember Andy Dalton from? They remember terrible Saturday playoff games that they had to watch on occasion with Andy Dalton.
First the Texans.
And then they remember, which the Texans, have their annual spot. And then they remember just a lot of mediocre performances in Cincinnati. Now, I think a lot of those mediocre performances in Cincinnati were impacted by the talent around him. Whenever he had talent around him, he played pretty well. But when A.J. Green wasn't healthy and the line was decimated, he looked like an average talent. And I think it's an interesting spot now because the skill position talent is very good around him, but Dallas's line has taken a ton of hits in terms of the injuries this year. So it'll be interesting to see what the field does, but my instincts are that Dalton's going to come in much lower owned than the other options, which makes him compelling for me for tournaments.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And for what it's worth, Dallas said they're not going to change their offense at all. As Leone said, they're playing at the quickest pace in the league. They're 14th in passing expectation. But, I mean, they're not going to change at all, and I don't think they really need to. So, yeah, I'm fine with Dalton. I'm probably one of those people who would lean more towards the Mahomes, Allen, Kyler stuff. Leone, do you have a lean in your favorite of the Mahomes, Allen, Kyler group?
Yeah, I think can I go full homer? Can I say it's Allen?
Yes.
Let's rock Josh Allen tonight.
We've been taking Josh Allen MVP tickets since it was 80-1. This is a Josh Allen this is a Josh Allen safe space.
I think it's a good spot to bounce back after a tough game last week. He gets John Brown back, which I think makes a really big difference. We saw some spacing issues with the Bills offense last week. We're expecting John Brown back. I think he's officially listed as questionable, but had a couple of full practices in. So between that and the rushing ability, I'm going to take Allen here as my favorite. He's also a little bit cheaper than Kyler and Mahomes on DraftKings, at least. On FanDuel, he's priced up a little bit more, but I think you might get an ownership discount as a result. So it kind of cancels out the loss of the price savings. So Allen's my favorite. I'm really struggling with the Dalton ceiling in tournaments. if I was running MME sets, I would most definitely include Dalton. I think there's some ways to unique builds, as Drew said. If I'm entering 3-max single entry, I'm just really torn on if he has the ceiling to get there. I'm really trying to be cognizant of it. We do have Dalton so underpriced, but I don't know. I think I'm going to try, Allen as my quarterback in single entry.
Adam, off the cuff, and I know you haven't had a lot of time to digest and haven't looked at it from an ownership perspective, but off the cuff, what would you think the ownership is between these 4 guys?
Yeah, I think it'll be Mahomes and Josh Allen a little bit ahead of Kyler, and then a pretty significant drop down to Dalton.
So do you think Dalton is like, I mean, if they were all neutral, it would be 25% since we have 4. Do you think Dalton is like 10%?
That sounds about right. Yeah, I think so. And specifically on DraftKings where you really don't need it.
Maybe I will play Dalton then. If he's going to be 10% and hope that you get, I mean, he could legitimately throw 4 touchdowns. I know that'll sound like super crazy and bold, but it could legitimately happen. I think the problem that you get weird with Dalton builds is you really still have to play Zeke to get those points, which I think is okay because you don't need a ceiling performance from Zeke, given that he's so far ahead of the other running backs, and you get the savings from Dalton to be able to fit him in. But you obviously don't want Zeke rushing for a couple of touchdowns in this scenario where, you need Dalton to at least come within striking distance of the 3 huge ceilings of the other guys.
Right, exactly. And yeah, when you're playing Dalton, you're also playing a heavier load of his pass catchers. And then if Zeke steals the touchdowns, you're just in big trouble there also, obviously. Okay, wide receiver. So I think this is kind of site dependent. Let's start with DraftKings where John Brown is coming back at 4K. And if you're willing to play John Brown at 4K, and as Leone said, he got in full practices, he's had plenty of time off, I think he is fine. That's going to open up a ton. We also have another injury situation where Sammy Watkins is not going to play in this game. And Mecole Hardman, the free Mecole movement, is on at 4,200. Now, Demarcus Robinson is going to play. And I think that maybe Mecole Hardman will be, I mean, everyone wants to click Mecole Hardman. Like, he's going to be very, very owned at this price. And he's a ridiculously explosive talent. I think more people will be on him by a ton than John Brown at the same price point. But if you're willing to play one or both of those, you can do a lot of different things on DraftKings. So I do think John Brown and Mecole Hardman will be 2 guys that will be owned. Hardman more so, and with certainly paths to downside. I also haven't changed since yesterday. Drew, what do you think about Hardman and John Brown in this spot? And I think they're going to be pretty owned. We'll start with DraftKings where they are very cheap.
Well, I think we've already decided based on the excitement over the free Mecole movement, based on the fact that CEH can't score a touchdown, that Mecole Hardman's getting a rushing touchdown tonight. So he starts with 6.5 points, depending on how far out you expect it to be. Which right off the bat, Leone, you've muted yourself, so just shut up while you're talking over there. And so right off the bat, I mean, Hardman's just an auto play. No, but I think these guys are really the thing that makes DraftKings so soft, right? These 2 prices in particular, these guys should probably along with Amari Cooper at 5,500. I mean, those 3 guys should all be like $1,000 more expensive, and then the slate would be a little bit more dynamic in terms of the options to use. I think a lot of the edge in this slate, honestly, on DraftKings is the fact that maybe casual people won't scroll all the way down to John Brown, right? And they'll see they'll see that he hasn't been playing of late. That's my thought process in terms of like really large field stuff, that he'll be less owned than he should because people will want to play DeAndre Hopkins. They'll want to play Tyreek Hill. They'll want to play Stephon Diggs. And so as a result, I think it's a situation where Hardman will be more owned than Brown. And I think Brown is the slightly better play. And my hope is that he goes kind of just under-owned entirely in tournaments. And then the clear pivots on these guys, right, are the 3 names right below them. They're Gallup, Kirk, Beasley. I think the ownership on those 3 guys should be substantially lower than Hardman and Brown. And those guys are on the field enough and we've seen Gallup. I mean, he basically just runs fly routes all day long. And if he hits on them, he breaks slates. And so I think those guys are kind of the easy pivots there that you have.
You reminded me of Wedding Crashers when you told me to shut up while I was talking.
Shut up while you're talking to me.
I was going to say, in addition to your Mecole Hardman getting a rushing touchdown, as we saw yesterday, if you're chalk, you get a rushing touchdown as well.
That's right. That's right. As soon as you're a chalk wide receiver, you get rushing touchdowns.
Someone did ask if you can play only 2 running backs in cash because we often like 3. Absolutely on this slate. And that's part of my kind of anger over wanting to play Zach Moss, and it's hard to justify when you've got McCole Hardman and John Brown at the same price tags, and those guys are clearly better plays than Moss. They're better plays than I think the Arizona running backs as well. And I wish the pricing was a little bit, I don't even know if tighter overall makes sense, but as you can see, these projected values after Lamb and Gallup, they drop down so much. It's, you really have to wrap your head around taking probably one stance somewhere where you're sacrificing a good bit of projection if you want to get in a pretty low owned guy, because the pricing is, you're kind of really giving us some clear tiers here.
I agree with Dink that the 3 best pivots are Gallup, Kirk, and Beasley. And there is a prop out there, which is Michael Gallup 42.5 receiving yards on FanDuel. We project for around 58.6 receiving yards. I don't like to take overs. I don't like to take overs on volatile guys like Michael Gallup who have a really, really wide range. So I'm not sure that's even a prop that I would take. The prop that I did take in this game was Larry Fitzgerald under 40.5 yards, was even money on FanDuel. Now it's 36.5 yards and it's minus 121. We project for 30.1 yards. So I don't think it's a bet anymore. Just a reminder to get your prop bets in early, ideally on Friday. But yeah, let's talk about Michael Gallup for a second, Leone, because obviously median projection on Michael Gallup is very, very hard. And this is where I'm always beaking at Leone and Dink about how the problems with median projections, because for some guys it's really tight and for some guys it's really wide, and it's hard to explain that. For Michael Gallup, it's obviously really wide. So talk about the assumptions for Michael Gallup as we get to his projection.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You see here, I've got the target shares on the season brought up, and you've got Michael Gallup seeing less total targets than Dalton Schultz. That hurts, man. Even if you assume spread out with Cooper and Lamb, you would expect that to rise. We're expecting it to rise, but at this point in the season, it becomes clear that he's 3rd in the pecking order. He's actually been 5th in the pecking order for targets. So that's why that median projection is a little bit tough, but he's got a high ADOT. He's also extremely talented. New quarterback too. We saw Dalton and Gallup connect late on a really big play to win that Giants game last week. Maybe it comes up as a result of that. I think there are a ton of outs for Gallup between big plays, between natural regression in targets, between the chemistry with Dalton maybe being a little bit different, and we see the targets come up. Remember, he out-targeted on a share basis Amari Cooper last year. So it's not like this guy can't handle big targets. So he's my favorite tournament play at receiver, where I don't feel like you're giving up a ton of projection on either FanDuel or DraftKings, but the upside is very clearly there.
Yeah, I like Gallup, and I also think Christian Kirk has shown an ability to perform when healthy, and he was not healthy for much of the first part of the season, and he looked really healthy last week. So I think Christian Kirk is an interesting pivot as well. And then Cole Beasley, as Dink mentioned, I mean, I've called him the king of dust in the past, but on these slates, man, there's been Thanksgiving slates where Cole Beasley has just absolutely buried me. And it has not been fun. And Cole Beasley has at least 10 DraftKings points, I believe, in every game this year. And I know some of that's been due to John Brown's injuries, but Cole Beasley can play, man, and quarterbacks like throwing to him. So I think Cole Beasley is interesting pivot as well. The only other guy I'm going to throw out there, because I have to for the Brands, is Andy Isabella, who they refuse to give more routes to at the expense of Larry Fitzgerald, but they should, because they prefer Isabella in the slot. Fitzgerald's playing in the slot. Fitzgerald's giving them nothing. Isabella's giving them everything. Maybe the fake sharp Cliff Kingsbury will remove his head from his ass tonight and get Isabella out there at the expense of Larry Fitzgerald. I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it, but it's at least worth noting down at 3,400 on Isabella.
I'll go DeMarcus Robinson to your Andy Isabella this week. I mean, DeMarcus Robinson in these like primetime, like small slate games, it seems like for whatever reason, maybe they just stand out because it's unusual, but it seems like there's always an opportunity for him. Sometimes he drops it wide open in the end zone. Sometimes he connects on touchdowns in the playoffs, but it seems like there's always an opportunity for him when you get into these primetime slates, and he's going to be on the field without Watkins.
Oh yeah.
2 projection notes just real quick. It's possible we have the split between Robinson and Hardman too wide as we're on the free McColl movement. So I would keep that in mind, that there's a chance we're over projecting Hardman a little bit and under projecting Robinson a little bit. And similarly, the Bills are without Dawson Knox tonight. And we'll see if they play a ton of 4 wide receiver stuff, which would mean Gabriel Davis, as someone that's been used in the red zone, I think is not a 3 max play by any means, but probably should be you're an MME mix where you get a sprinkle of him.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We'll talk about Tyler Kroft in a second. Anything specific? Go back to wide receiver for a second. Anything specific to FanDuel at wide receiver?
I mean, Hopkins is probably not as good of a play when you lose the bonus and full PPR scoring, where I'd really side with Zeke. I think on DraftKings, you kind of have to decide between Hopkins and Kelsey if you're playing cash. On FanDuel, I think it's a little bit easier to get off Hopkins there. In general, I think the FanDuel pricing is better, where these values are scrunched together a little bit more, and it's a little bit easier to be contrarian. But as far as the order of the plays, they're pretty similar. McColl is really, really cheap there, but I think that could deflate the John Brown ownership even more on FanDuel with McColl being cheaper.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously the gap between Cooper and Lamb is much more, and so Lamb is a little bit better on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to tight end. And the story at tight end, obviously Travis Kelce is projecting just massively above anybody else on this slate. And if you read matchups from Silva, he thought that Schultz actually might be the loser, the one who would lose in the Andy Dalton move. And also Arizona has defended tight ends reasonably well after being the laughing stock against tight ends last year. Getting to Kelce is not going to be easy if you want to play DeAndre Hopkins. And so there's comes a point where it's like there's going to be an if then. And I think a lot of people are going to land on Kelce. Let's talk about handling him specifically on each site. Dink, what do you think about Kelce and how to handle his salary?
Yeah, I think, it's one of these situations with Kelce where he doesn't need to do a lot to really separate from the position. And that's where you get it. That's why people are probably going to land on him, but I think deservedly so. Because really, the thing about Kelce, especially on DraftKings where pricing is so loose, you've got this situation where under normal circumstances, if pricing was like normally tight, you would have a situation where, okay, how are my routes to Kelce not being in the winning GPP lineup tonight? The routes are that he doesn't have a big game, obviously, because the moment he has a big game, that's going to put pressure on that. The other routes are that other guys that are cheaper have big games. And you look at this motley crew of tight ends, and who there could possibly have a big game? Most of these guys are probably going to see sub 4 targets, sub 3 targets. So it's almost impossible for these guys to have a big game. Dalton Schultz is maybe the guy. Maybe Tyler Kroft catches, a couple balls in the red zone. We've seen the Bills use tight ends in the red zone, but really thin paths to these guys scoring enough that they beat even a good or solid Travis Kelce game. So then it comes down to roster construction, right? So if Kelce has a good or solid game and the other tight ends don't have big games to compete with him, now I can win with roster construction where he's not on the optimal. Well, DraftKings, the pricing is so loose that it's hard to see that being the path to winning, right? Because essentially, whatever points you're losing at tight end with Kelce versus the other teams, you're going to have to pick up in other spots, and you can play anybody you want. So how are you going to pick up those spots? So I think it's a really tough conversation on DraftKings in terms of how to handle Kelce in any other way than kind of trying to be aggressive. And on FanDuel, I think there's more conversation because the pricing, because Zeke is over 9K, because Hopkins and Tyreek Hill are in the 8Ks. There's more pressure on different lineup constructions. And so I think, we often will give FanDuel a hard time about Monday nights because their showdown product, I don't think, or their single game product, I don't think is as strong as DraftKings, but their slates tonight, I think, are way better than DraftKings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agree. Some projection notes on the tight ends. The Bills, they've most struggled versus the tight end position of the skill players. You can see that on our Establish the Run DVP rankings. And also Kelce, he's just dominating the target share. He's really separated from Tyreek Hill as the number one thus far this year. It's 5 games. That stuff could change. It could normalize a little bit. I do think it's worth noting for Buffalo in week 2 that week 3, Tyler Kroft played 71% of snaps. That was a game Dawson Knox missed. He also saw 5 targets. The difficult part is John Brown left this game early. You can see he only played 29 snaps. So it's hard to discern how much Tyler Kroft will play. Are they going to play 3 wide receivers with Croft and Gabriel Davis's snaps come down from that week 3 game, or are they going to play 4 wide receivers and Croft snaps come down? So, just a couple of interesting notes as far as trying to project those tight ends.
Yeah, I think that one thing about Buffalo is Drew noted is that they're willing to throw to tight end in the red zone and scheme things to red zone. So for tight ends, so I think you could see Gabriel Davis play between the 20s plenty, and then they get Croft in there in the red zone. And I think that's a way that Croft can get there. Obviously, he'll need to catch a touchdown. I don't think he's going to go for more than like 30 or 40 yards as an absolute ceiling in this game. One thing that Drew forgot to mention how the other way that Travis Kelce can fail, and that is that he is in the age model and he is 30. Over 30 years old. He'll be 31, I believe, very soon. And so you don't know when the age model is going to hit with these guys. It hit very quickly with T.Y. Hilton. It hit very quickly with Zach Ertz. And you don't know when it can hit Travis Kelce. You just never know, man. The age model works in mysterious ways.
What's super annoying about the Bills, I got to point this out, but Tyler Kroft, Lee Smith, and Reggie Gilliam, who all should be active tonight for the Bills, have a combined 7 catches and 4 touchdowns on the season.
Exactly.
Which is like enough to screw up your Allen stacks, but not enough that they themselves get there in those stacks.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Defense. I think because of the way Josh Allen plays, full YOLO ball, run around like a maniac, not care as much about turning the ball over, not that careful, fumbles, etc., that Chiefs is going to be the best defense tonight. I also think they will likely be the most owned, but you can see other defenses getting there. Obviously, the Bills is going to be the worst against Patrick Mahomes. And also, this Bills defense hasn't played that well this year. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, Leody, but your Bills have not been great against the pass, despite facing Darnold, Fitz, Goff, Carr, Tannehill, 20th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 24th in pass defense, DVOA. And I know we're talking about turnovers now, but still.
Hasn't been great.
Has not been great. So anyways, let's talk about defense for a second. I do think Chiefs are best and will be most owned. Let's start with Leone. What do you think about defense tonight?
Yeah, the Bills get Tre'Davious White back this week, most likely. Hopefully they get Matt Milano, a cover linebacker, back. If not, it even looks better for Kelce. I'm going full football guy on you with some of the defensive individual matchups there. But it's tough to swallow that. I mean, you need one. I guess the argument is the totals in this slate are so high that if the Bills D scores on a fluky play, they get there. And no one's probably racking up a whole ton of points. I think Cowboys might end up being the best mix of ownership and projection at first glance, but I don't know. How would you project the ownerships here, Adam?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I don't think people are going to play Bills very much, but the other 3 I think will be owned. I think in general, Dink, just on these 2-game slates, how do you handle defense? Because it's almost, I don't want to say completely random, but it's going to be pretty random which one falls on the fumble, which one returns a kickoff for a touchdown, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I had this take on the last 2-game slate, and I'm forgetting which chalk defense was. Maybe it was the Packers that just like absolutely annihilated me very quickly. But my take is on these 2-game slates that defense is highly variant, 1. 2, ownership gets really condensed. People feel really confident about the defenses that they pick that can outscore. And so as a result, if we had all these teams kind of evenly distributed in ownership, you get them around 25%. But what you'll likely get is one defense that gets above like 40%, right? And the look at the range of projection that we have on these defenses. It's a few points. We see there are times during the season where you get these outsized defensive performances where teams get multiple touchdowns and different things like that. But most weeks, defenses don't really matter that much. I know they end up deciding like the Millie Maker tournaments, the Lotto Ball tournaments, because those are the things that end up separating. But most weeks, if you were to pick 5 defenses at random, you're going to find a point differential that's much tighter than if you picked 5 wide receivers at random or 5 running backs at random. And so as a result, I like to play these slates at a little bit more balanced ownership, where maybe I'll cap the individual ownership of any one defense that I play up around like 30% or something like that. So I know that I'm going to be underweight some of the defenses that are most heavily utilized, but I'm also going to have overweights on all the really low owned defenses. And that's a way to naturally kind of differentiate myself in these large field tournaments.
And you want to talk through the if you are using an optimizer like Labs, the amount of players to allow against your defense on a slate like this?
Yeah, so that's another thing that a lot of people, if you are used to using an optimizer during the course of the regular season, a lot of the optimizers come preloaded with the context of do not allow an offensive player against my team defense. That is a huge mistake on a 2-game slate, just a monstrous mistake, because most of the lineups you're going to build are going to have representation from almost every offense that you're playing. So if you do something like that, you'll end up essentially overweight one defense really heavily and underweight one offense really heavily. So for me, on FanDuel, I'll probably have allowing 2 offensive players against my defense, and on DraftKings, I'd go up as far as 3 or 4. Because DraftKings, you can get there with receptions and different things like that allow. FanDuel, you need to get there your offensive players with touchdowns. And so as a result, those are like really more strongly negatively correlated on FanDuel than they are on DraftKings. But make sure that if you are using an optimizer, to check that setting, because it's one of the biggest mistakes that people who are casually using optimizers on these small slates make.
Yeah, if the Bills D has a fluky touchdown too, you also create an extra possession for Mahomes.
Yeah.
So it can get real weird on a short slate.
Yes, I know how much Dink loves to talk about the double dip, and Mecole Hardman is an opportunity to double dip with the
those double dip donkeys getting there yesterday. I saw screenshots of the double dip donkeys around the industry slaying it. So they didn't use the double dip, but they had a big day. Shout out CSU.
Okay, if you are interested in using an optimizer like Drew was talking about, we do have a deal with our friends at Fantasy Labs. Go to the DFS tab on establishingtrend.com. The last tab will link you to Fantasy Labs DFS optimizer. They will come preloaded with our projections, and for main slates, they'll come preloaded with my ownership projections as well. Flag plants. Does anyone want to give flag plants? I'm not.
Adam, you have to give a flag plant. Drew and I do it. You got to give a flag plant.
All right, fine. You go first, and then I'll think of a flag plant.
Oh, can I flag plant? Zach Moss scores a touchdown, but I still don't know if he cracks the
I bet that's right on FanDuel. That's probably true on FanDuel.
Yeah.
The worst flag plan possible.
Worst flag plan ever. Zach Moss is going to score a touchdown. You guys do with that information what you will.
Go ahead, Drew.
I'll flag plant Andy Dalton. I think he's going to be under-owned compared to the field. I think there's a lot of reasons that make sense given the strength and the high-end nature of the quarterbacks on the slate. But I think you want to buy into the cheaper price tag. You want to buy into the fact that this Dallas offense is going to be pass heavy, and you want to buy into the fact that he's got great skill players around him. So I'll flag plant Andy Dalton.
You guys know me.
It's tough, huh?
As the chalk donkey. However, I am going off the board here. I'm going to go Christian Kirk. Take advantage of.
Oh, I love it.
Take advantage of Larry Fitzgerald being, like 3 years past being done. Take advantage of Arizona's refusal to use Andy Isabella as they should, and take advantage of really this just atrocious Dallas defense and Christian Kirk's health. And so, I think Christian Kirk will come in really low owned because John Brown and Mecole Hardman. And by the way, I know why people want to click Mecole Hardman, man. It's exciting. So I really don't have that big a problem with Mecole Hardman even at elevated ownership. But yeah, anyways, I think Christian Kirk's a really good pivot. All right. Remind everyone, if you enjoyed this free show, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. We'll try to keep doing some more of these free shows for everyone. Obviously, we also have the free podcast on the podcast feeds for subscribers. We will be back on Friday night for myself, Wiggins, and Silva talking through the Week 7 main slate. Drew and Mike will be back to talk about tournaments on Saturday, and then Silva and I have the last-minute live stream. Leone and Wiggins have the Wake and Bake on Sunday morning. So there is a lot going on. Again, if you're new, you want to try ETR for the first time, there's a couple of promo codes in the description below. Check those out. Good luck on this 2-game slate, man. It should be fun. I'm not going to go as far to say I would actually watch the games if I didn't have money on it, because I know I wouldn't. But still, I think this might actually be fun football to watch. So, for Drew, for Mike, for producer Mike, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.